The LA Kings will be holding down a playoff spot on Thanksgiving Day. We'll talk about why that could be important and what are the options for the Kings when it comes to fixing their struggling power play. We'll talk about that next on this edition of Locked On LA Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, Kings fans, welcome to Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, the #1 sports podcast network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On LA Kings your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Download the FanDuel app by visiting FanDuel.com and win $300 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. I'm Eddie Garcia, your host of Locked On LA Kings. I've worked in sports media for the past 30 years, also one of the co-hosts of Locked On NHL Game Night, a nightly podcast and YouTube show that wraps up the night in the NHL, and a passionate LA Kings fan for over 30 years. The LA Kings are off until Friday when they will face the Ducks in Anaheim in what has turned into one of the more highly anticipated freeway face-off matchups in recent memory. But we are approaching Thanksgiving, and you may or may not know what that means in terms of NHL teams making the Stanley Cup playoffs. If you don't know, it is a well-known theory that if you are a team holding a playoff spot on American Thanksgiving, there is a very good chance you are going to make the playoffs. How good of a chance? Well, since the 2005-06 season, 77.1% of the teams holding a playoff spot on Thanksgiving Day made the playoffs. Last season, 6 of the 8 teams in each conference were in a playoff position on Thanksgiving. That was November 28th last year, and they were there at the end of the season as well, including the LA Kings. So I thought, let's go back and see how accurate this is for the Kings specifically. But first, I needed to make sure the Kings were guaranteed of being in a playoff spot this Thanksgiving. Now, the Kings right now, as we are recording this, sit in third place in the Pacific Division. And again, the Kings don't play again until after Thanksgiving, but the teams they are competing with for playoff spots are playing on Wednesday. So if those teams all won, could they all pass the Kings and the Kings be on the outside looking in at a playoff spot on Thanksgiving? And the answer is no. There is no possibility that the LA Kings will not be holding a playoff spot on Thanksgiving, no matter what happens in any of the other games. Now, there might be a possibility the Kings could be the final wild card team in the West. Actually, they could even move up to number 2 in the Pacific. Right now, they're number 3. They could move up to the second spot if the Seattle Kraken were to lose in regulation to the Stars on Wednesday. There's also the worst case scenario. The Kings would be the final wildcard spot in the West. That is, if the Vegas Golden Knights beat the Ottawa Senators on Wednesday, they would pass the Kings. They would have one more point than LA. And if the Utah Mammoth beat the Montreal Canadiens in regulation on Wednesday, they would also move 1 point up on LA. I'm not even going to get into what would happen if one or both of those teams lost in overtime and got a point and was tied with the Kings. What are the tiebreakers? I'm not getting into all that. Just know, no matter what happens on Wednesday, on American Thanksgiving on Thursday, the LA Kings will be holding down a playoff spot. Exactly where? Don't know, but they will be in a playoff spot no matter what. So historically, how does this look for the LA Kings? I was going to go back 10 years, but the data that I found only went back the last 9 years. So we're going back the last 9 years to see how does this work out for the Kings if they are in a playoff spot on Thanksgiving Day, and if they're not in a playoff spot on Thanksgiving Day. So, and by the way, if you're ever curious about finding out standings or player stats over a certain period of time, there's a good site called quanthockey.com, Quant hockey.com, if you ever want to research something like that. All right, last season, 2024-25 season, on Thanksgiving, the LA Kings had 27 points. That was good enough for third place in the Pacific Division, and they would go on to make the playoffs, of course, last year, losing in the first round of the Edmonton Oilers. So last year, they were in a playoff spot on Thanksgiving, and they ended up making the playoffs. 2023-24 on Thanksgiving, the Kings had 25 points. They were in third place in the Pacific Division, went on to make the playoffs, lost in the first round of the Oilers. So again, 2023-24 season, Kings were in a playoff spot on Thanksgiving Day, and they did make the playoffs. 2022-23 on Thanksgiving, the Kings had 24 points. They were in third place in the Pacific Division, and they went on to make the playoffs and, of course, lose to the Oilers in the first round. In 2021-22, on Thanksgiving Day, the LA Kings had 19 points. They were not holding a playoff spot. They were 2 points out of a wild card spot in the West, but they did make the playoffs that year. They finished third in the Pacific Division, and they lost to the Oilers in the first round of the playoffs. Now, the 2021 season was the COVID season, which didn't start until well after Thanksgiving. The first day of that season was January the 13th, so obviously that doesn't fit into the equation. So we throw out the 2021 season. 2019-20 on Thanksgiving, the Kings were dead last in the Western Conference with 22 points, and they did not make the playoffs that year. 2018-19, the Kings were dead last in the Western Conference with 15 points. They did not make the playoffs that year. 2017-18 season, the Kings had 26 points. They were in second place in the Pacific Division on Thanksgiving Day, and they would make the playoffs, losing in the first round to the Vegas Golden Knights. And in the 2016-17 season, on Thanksgiving Day, the Kings had 23 points. They were third in the Pacific Division, but they did not make the playoffs that year. They actually finished in fifth place in the division on the outside looking in at a playoff spot. So in the last 8 years, because we're throwing out that COVID season, the 4 years the Kings were in a playoff spot on Thanksgiving Day, 3 times they made the playoffs. The 4 years where the Kings were not in a playoff spot on Thanksgiving Day, 3 of those years they did not make the playoffs. So 6 out of the 8 years when the Kings were or were not in a playoff spot on Thanksgiving, they either did make the playoffs or didn't make the playoffs. So it was 75% accurate for the LA Kings over the last 8 seasons in which there was a game played or there were standings on Thanksgiving Day. So again, it was the other percentage we had was 77.1%. The Kings are 75%. What does it all mean? It all means that the Kings being in the playoff spot this Thanksgiving means it is very likely the Kings are going to make the playoffs this season. Now, is it a guarantee? No, of course not. And frankly, this season does seem a little bit more wide open than any of those last 8 seasons that we've been talking about. But if you are looking for something to be encouraged about, something to be positive about after the first 23 games of this season for the LA Kings, it is that they are likely to be in a playoff spot statistically when it's all said and done. Now, is that the end game for the LA Kings? Of course not. And, we talked about it last year. The regular season, I hate to say it like this. I hate to say it doesn't matter because that's not true. But ultimately, what does matter is the playoffs for the LA Kings. We've been in the playoffs 4 years in a row. We've seen no progress with a first-round playoff exit every time. The Kings have not won a playoff series since winning the Stanley Cup in 2014, 0-5 in the postseason and advancing out of the first round since then. So whether this regular season turns out to be the Kings just kind of scraping by and getting a playoff spot, or whether they put it all together and contend for the division title, I mean, it's all good. We wanted to see them be as successful as possible in the regular season, but ultimately, what is going to matter when it's all said and done is, do the Kings not only get in the playoffs, but have success in the postseason? Now, another thing I think we should be positive about, and I've admitted it many times, I've said it many times, you may agree or disagree. I think of myself as an optimistic person. I think of myself as a hopeful person. I see the glass as half full most of the time. And I hope that comes across when we talk about the Kings. If you want to be optimistic about this year's Kings, again, they're going to be holding a playoff spot on Thanksgiving, which is a great indicator of them making the playoffs. And we have not seen the best version of the LA Kings so far this season. I think this team is capable of a lot more, or at least more. Maybe not a lot more, but more for sure, and hopefully a lot more. And if you look at the roster, is anyone really playing outstanding hockey right now? Maybe Darcy Kemper, but even he started slow. He's turned it on of late. But nobody is really having like a career type year. There are some guys having good seasons, but there are also several guys playing below expectations. We know the power play hasn't been there. If those guys can step it up, if the power play can become just okay, I think that the LA Kings can offer more than what we've seen so far this season. But it's always nice to have a playoff spot on Thanksgiving Day, in case you didn't know that. One area that we all know has to be better, of course, is the power play. How can the Kings get better on the power play? We're going to discuss that next here on Locked in LA Kings, your team every day. The NBA is back, and there's no better place to get on the action than FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you miss the start of a game, it doesn't really matter. You can place live bets at any point of a game, beginning, middle, stretch run, whenever you want. And you could bet on just about anything, like which player is going to score next or how many points that player is going to score, no matter if it's points in a quarter, points and a half, points in a game. And you can combine any of your live bets into a same game parlay. How many points a player is going to have, what's the over-under in a game, who's going to win the game. You combine it all together, and if you hit on that parlay, you get a bigger payout. You want to bet on your favorite team? You can do that. But whether you want to bet on your favorite team or a team you hate, whether the game's a great game on a buzzer beater or it's a blowout, it doesn't matter, because you can make things more interesting by placing a wager or two on that game, regardless of how it goes, because FanDuel makes every game exciting no matter the outcome. Right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's $300 in bonus bets by hitting your first $5 bet. So head to FanDuel.com, sign up, and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Talking about the LA Kings at the Thanksgiving break. And again, there's no question the big thing the Kings need to improve going forward is the power play. Yes, it was great to see them score on the power play and have that power play goal be the game winner in their last game against Ottawa. But as I said in the recap of that show, while that's good and maybe it helps the confidence, maybe that's the thing that gets them going, if you looked at how the power play performed and looked in that game, it was still not good. And it really hasn't looked any better since the return of Andrei Kuzmenko. As a matter of fact, their power play percentage has gone down in the brief time Kuzmenko has been back. It's been going down for a while now. Now, it's only been 3 games with Kuzi back in the lineup. And to be fair, probably needs to get more time to see how it eventually works out. And I do think Andrei Kuzmenko needs to be a part of the solution. But I think it's also become very clear that the Kings need to move off of that 5-forward first power play unit. Now, people were calling for this weeks ago, and I admit at the time I was preaching, let's have a little bit more patience. Let's give it more time. Let's see what happens when Kuzmenko is inserted back into the lineup. But I think even people like me who had practiced or preached patience are saying, okay, it's time to try something else. Now, we had friend of the show, Russell Morgan from Hockey Royalty, on recently, and he was not in favor of moving away from the 5-forward power play unit. He just didn't like the way the Kings were using those 5 forwards. And I understand the point he's making. If you're going to have 5 forwards out there, and those 5 forwards are all going to be, pretty high end in their offensive abilities, shooting the puck, quickness, skating ability, passing ability, then you should be a finesse type of power play and play to the strengths of those players. And theoretically, if you have a defenseman out there not named Cale Makar or Quinn Hughes, they're not going to be as offensively gifted, most likely, as any of the forwards you might be able to put out there. So I don't disagree with Russell's point. I don't think he's wrong about what he's saying. If you're going to have the 5 forwards, it needs to be more of a finesse style that you take advantage of their abilities. The problem, though, is that the 5-man power play unit for the Kings, while they're trying to be creative, it isn't resulting in any goals. And even when it has looked good and they've passed the puck around the perimeter and they've gotten a few good looks, if it's not going in the net, eventually you have to change something. And it hasn't really looked good even the past few games, right? There was a point where it was looking better and you're like, okay, it's encouraging. Let's stick with it. But it's not even really looking very good anymore. The best chances the Kings have had recently on the power play have come from point shots or one-timers from the wings. And you don't need 5 forwards on the ice to be able to set those types of things up. So I do think it is time to simplify on the power play. I know Jim Fox has subtly preached this in the game broadcast, if you've noticed that. I think it's time to put Brant Clark on the point on the number 1 power play unit, have Corey Perry in front of the net, working his magic, and have everyone else interchanging, moving on the wings, and trying to get shots on goal. If you can't get that one-timer from the point, get the one-timer from the left face-off dot or the right face-off dot, and then try and get rebounds. It's not exciting hockey per se, but it's about results at this point. They've tried to do it with skill and passing and with that 5-forward unit, and it isn't working. And as a matter of fact, the Kings' second unit has been the more effective of the two units as far as getting some quality scoring chances. Now, neither one of them has been productive. Neither one of them is putting it into the net, but I would say with quote unquote lesser players on that second unit, it's been more effective than the first unit, which has the 5 forwards on it. So I've said that the Kings have missed Drew Doughty. I think once he comes back, and if it's still struggling, you've got to have him running the point on the number 1 unit, have Brant Clark running the second unit. But of course, Doughty's not available for still a few more weeks. So if you do have Brant Clark on that first power play unit, the obvious question is, who are you going to put running the second power play unit as a defenseman? Now, I thought Joel Edmondson, who has that big blast shot from the point, it's been clocked at 96 miles an hour this year, I thought maybe he could be a guy to use that big bomb from the point and get pucks on net. So I looked at his career stats, and come to find out, in 626 NHL games, Joel Edmondson has 0 power play goals. Wow. So how about Brian Dumoulin? 729 career NHL games. He has 0 power play goals. He has 1 point. 1 power play point. All right. How about Cody Ceci? 894 career NHL games. 0 power play goals. However, he does have a whopping 12 power play points in his career, although none in the last 9 seasons. Mikey Anderson, 368 NHL games. He has 1 power play goal, 0 power play assists. So the options for Jim Hiller having another defenseman on the point, not great right now. And I'm sure he knows that. I'm sure they know that. And that could be, and is likely, a big reason why we haven't seen 2 defensemen running the 2 power plays for the Kings at this point. Now, does it mean that the Kings have to wait until Drew Doughty gets back before they try that? Well, probably. Because they're really, other than Brant Clark, there's nobody else out there that has the ability to do it. You can give it a try and maybe somebody surprises you. But when those are the options, having another defenseman running the second power play unit, those are obviously not very good options. And you can be critical of the man who created the roster to have players like that who have literally no ability to contribute anything on the power play. But that's what's facing Jim Hiller right now when he's trying to figure out what can we change, what can we do to try and get this power play going. Coming up next, we're going to have a Reign report and some unfortunate news about Reign goalie Eric Portillo. And also, if you thought adding Corey Perry was bad, wait till you hear this next name. That's coming up next here on Locked In LA Kings, your team every day. Hockey season is obviously here, and nothing beats being in the arena for a game. But let's be real, getting tickets can sometimes be a total headache between waiting in queues, surprise fees, and prices that jump right before checkout. It's easy to get frustrated when all you want to do is cheer on your team. But that's where Gametime comes in, the app that gives fans the advantage. It's your ultimate life hack for scoring amazing NHL tickets fast, easy, and stress-free. I love that what you see is what you pay. There's no hidden fees at checkout. Plus, you can actually view what your seat is going to be, what the view is going to be from your seat. When you buy your ticket, they have an in-app seat view feature that is awesome. Their zone deals are a game changer. You pick your section, Gametime picks the seats, and you save big. You can even find NHL tickets for under $25. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. That's the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. All right, before we get to our rain report, it is still very early in the season, and there are a lot of teams that still are within distance of a playoff spot. It's very competitive in the NHL so far this early season, but there are a few teams that have looked at the reality of their situation and said, you know what, it's time to start thinking about the future. And we are looking at making a deal or two at some point this season. The Vancouver Canucks are apparently one of those teams. They have let it be known to all the other teams out there, we are willing to part with some of our veterans. We are willing to part with any of our upcoming UFAs that we are not going to re-sign. So I saw that report and I went to the Canucks roster and I said, who might the LA Kings be interested? Who is someone on that roster that realistically the Kings could get and might be able to help them out? And one name stood out, and it's not a player that I don't think anyone's going to be very excited about. That player is Evander Kane. He's an unrestricted free agent after this season. He has playoff experience. He's a veteran. He's got good size, 6'2", 220 pounds. We know from his time in Edmonton and what he did last year, he's a gritty guy who can be one of those playoff performers. The Kings likely, if Andrei Kuzmenko doesn't get it going, they're going to be looking for a winger. And most importantly in all of this, Evander Kane has history with Kings GM Ken Holland. It was Ken Holland, then the GM of the Oilers, who signed Evander Kane in Edmonton to a 4-year deal back in 2022. Now, I am personally not a fan of Evander Kane. I wouldn't feel great about him joining the LA Kings. I'm just saying, when you look at that roster and who the Kings might be looking at, who would be a realistic, I'm not saying Evander Kane is the best option the Kings could get off of that Canucks roster. He's not. But realistically, and knowing the way Ken Holland loves those veteran guys and a guy he has history with, I could see Evander Kane being that guy. Now, another player that I think probably isn't as realistic, who's going to be much more in demand, that I think would be of interest for the Kings, specifically to help their power play, is Jake DeBrusk. He is a winger. He could be available as a veteran player they're looking to part with. He's got 7 power play goals this season, which would by far lead the Kings. And again, if Andrei Kuzmenko doesn't come around, he is a winger that could be available that could absolutely help the power play, just like Kuzmenko did last year. The Kings, if Kuzmenko doesn't get it going, if that power play is still struggling all year long, the Kings are going to make acquiring a player at the deadline to strengthen the power play a priority. Jake DeBrusk could be that guy. All right, we do have a rain report thanks to our good friend Don in the San Fernando Valley, who is watching all of these rain games and reporting back to us. And we have good news to report as far as a couple of results. The last 2 games for the Ontario Reign, back-to-back 3-2 victories over the Bakersfield Condors. On this past Friday, the Reign won 3-2 over Bakersfield. And Don says about that game, the Reign played very well defensively. They allowed Bakersfield just 7 shots in the first 2 periods. Unfortunately, the Reign did take a couple penalties in the 3rd period, allowed Bakersfield to score a couple of late goals, made the game a little more tense, but the Reign hung on and prevailed. He said the line of Connors, Wright, and Lee continues their strong play, and their entire lane was selected as the 3 stars of the game, with Kenny Connors being the number 1 star. He said Kenny Connors had a Gordie Howe hat trick in that game with a goal, assist, and a fight. He says Connors did well in the bout, avoiding being hit hard. He said he had several good shots into the face of his opponent, Matt Coponi. And he said when Coponi attempted a roundhouse punch, Connors avoided it and then used his momentum to flip him judo style down to the ice. Nobody was seriously hurt, and it was fun to watch. He said Jared Wright also had a fight and gave back at least as good as he got in standing up for a teammate. All right, so there you go. On Saturday, it was also a 3-2 win for the Reign over Bakersfield. He says the top 2 defensive pairings have been Kirill Kirsanov and Sam Bolduc, and Kyle Burrows and Angus Booth. He says that they have been fairly established as the team gets more defensive consistency. Angus Booth seems to be getting back to the efficient and consistent play that he showed last season. He says the Reign allowed only 15 shots to Bakersfield in the game, including just 2 shots in the third period, and no shots in the last 11 minutes of regulation, plus all of overtime. So it was an overtime win for the Reign. He says goalie Isaiah Seville made 13 saves, some of them difficult, but the 2 goals he let in looked stoppable, in my opinion. Jared Wright used his speed, stole the puck during a Bakersfield breakout, and went in on a breakaway to score the overtime game winner for Jared Wright. He says, quick opinion on Jared Wright. He reminds me somewhat of a guy who played for both the Kings and the Reign a few years back named Austin Wagner. Like Wagner, Wright has blazing speed and checks very well. Wright is 6'3", so he's taller than Wagner. Seems to be a bit stronger, but their weights are similar as listed. At this point, Wright seems to have a better scoring touch, which is important because Wagner, if you recall, was very scoring challenged and would get breakaways after breakaways, but almost never put the puck in the net. I definitely remember that. He says that's why Austin Wagner is now not in the NHL. He had the speed and the checking, but nothing else. With more scoring touch, things could be different with Jared Wright. Seeing him score on that breakaway gives me hope of that possibility. And thanks to Don in the San Fernando Valley for his continued reports on the Ontario Reign. I definitely feel like I know more about this team than I would otherwise from just reading the box scores and, checking the stats and things like that. So appreciate Don's hard work in letting us know what's going on with the Ontario Reign and getting good reports on Kenny Connors. And maybe he can be a guy that can contribute at the NHL level here in the not too distant future. As for the Ontario Reign, they've got 2 games coming up at home this Friday and Sunday. Friday, they're hosting the Henderson Silver Knights, and then on Sunday, they're at home against the Texas Stars. Don had mentioned in one of his Reign reports recently about goalie Eric Portillo getting injured in a game. It has been confirmed. Portillo did, in fact, suffer a back injury, and it is related to the injury that hit him last season and caused him to miss significant time. Clearly, the organization is going to be very careful and cautious with this. There is no timetable for his return. That's obviously very disappointing for Eric Portillo. And it does obviously indicate that if something were to happen to either Darcy Kemper or Anton Forsberg short term, then right now the only option would be for Phoenix Copley to come up and help out. If something were to happen, God forbid, long term to one of those guys, maybe it's Copley, but more likely the Kings would probably look to try and go out and acquire another goaltender. All right, hopefully that does not happen. Now, if you are an everydayer, someone who listens and watches Locked On LA Kings every day, I'm going to take a couple of days off for the Thanksgiving holiday, but we are going to have 5 shows this week. We will have a recap show after the Kings-Ducks game on Friday afternoon. We will have a recap show after the Kings-Canucks game on Saturday night. And on Sunday, we will have our usual weekly fan feedback show. So you are going to get your full complement of shows this week of Locked On LA Kings, but a couple of days off for the Thanksgiving holiday. Also, for that fan feedback show, as you know, if you want to get in an email for that, lockedoneddie@gmail.com, EDDIE. And, with the Thanksgiving holiday, everybody's going to be busy. So that gives you an extra day or two to get those emails in. And if you want to also leave your comments, if you're watching on YouTube in the comments section, it always helps out the algorithm. We'd love you to stay connected with the show on social media, X, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. We're at Locked On LA Kings. And also want to say I am very thankful for all of you, for all of your support of me and this show. And I wish you all a very, very happy Thanksgiving. It is my favorite holiday. Food, family, football, and a little hockey as well. Love that. Love it. Don't have to give me gifts. I love Thanksgiving. Great holiday. Okay, I'm Eddie Garcia. Thank you for listening and watching Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Have a great rest of your day. Have a great Thanksgiving. We'll talk to you next time. And as always, go Kings, go.